A lot of people are comparing the current moment we have now with high levels of inequality, with climate and other environmental crises, to the types of crises that we had in the 1920s and 1930s. And in many ways, I think that's the right kind of analysis. We're in a massive moment of change, and there are a lot of regressive political movements that seem to be capitalizing, taking advantage of that kind of change. If we look back to the New Deal in America and the responses of other governments around that time, we saw that they had a lot of imagination. They decided to rethink certain elements of economics that were seen as completely sacred or untouchable at the time. We need to be having a similar level of imagination now to think about the types of economics that we need to respond to the massive crises that we have. And one of the big issues that we face, which is different from then, is how deep this environmental crisis goes. It's not just what we're doing to the climate, that is a major serious problem, but soils are being depleted, our oceans are being destabilized, and species are going extinct. So we're in a situation now where incremental or slow change is not going to cut it, because this is the crisis, and one that interrelates with all the others, like inequality. So we need an even greater imagination now than we saw in the 1920s and 1930s and after the Second World War to create the economic policies that save us from these crises and help us build a better world in the process.
So what key elements do you think we can take away from the 1930s, and maybe what can we do better? Or
a positive thing we can take away from the 20s, 30s, 40s is the attitude that governments had to spending government money, to investing directly in the economy, and to creating new institutions. So in many Western countries and others around the world, the response to the Great Depression, as well as the Second World War, was to create welfare states, to provide social security to their citizens, and to create new institutions to make sure that people could be a deeper part of society. That's one thing we can learn. That's a very positive lesson, and that's why many people are drawing the parallels between a New Deal and a Green New Deal today. But there are some other lessons that we can learn from the time. One of the key ones is that after the First World War, as well as after the Second World War, a number of economists were arguing that we needed a different financial system, a global financial system, one that made sure that the world was kept safe from massive financial crashes and other problems. That didn't materialize, or it is not endured to this day, and we still find ourselves in a situation where much of the global financial system is dominated by a few people in their interest and is increasingly exposed to big risks, both ones that we think about all the time, like the risk of a housing bubble like we saw in 2007, 2008, but also new risks coming from climate and other environmental change. We need to change the financial system in a way that they were not able to achieve after the First World War and after the Second World War, and that's a big lesson that we've got to learn.
One final question maybe. So in the 1930s you had also this big intellectual shifts with someone like Keynes, who exactly thought about this international financial system, how you would order it, but you also talked about a certain discourse and narrative that you need to have that is very broad, what you just mentioned. So is there a trade-off, or how do you think does this paradigm shift happen?
Big shifts in the economic policies and politics that dominates our lives. We say there are sort of three elements to that. There's the intellectual side, so the arguments from economists. There are then the narratives, the way that that's explained to people. And then there are the policies that are introduced by governments. A lot of the time we look back at the shift after the Second World War and we say, right, we had great ideas from Keynes, we had narratives about needing to make sure everyone was included in the economy, and then we had policies that helped us achieve that, like making sure that we had full employment. Now, in many respects, those are very useful things to adopt today, and that's why many people are looking back and revisiting the lessons of Keynes and using narratives that talk about being more inclusive in the economy, and then talking about policies like a Green New Deal that would help achieve that. But we've got to go a level deeper because the world is so much different now. For a start, those ideas and narratives that we had back then were ones that were racially exclusive. both within countries and across the world. They were also ones that were in many respects exclusive of people across the income ladder as well. This was a vastly different world dominated by empires and by an aristocratic elite. We've got a completely different situation, and we can no longer make the mistakes that we did then when it comes to not including the full range of people that needed to be included in society. And that's particularly serious today because of two things. One, if people remain as dissatisfied as they are now, rightly, about their role within the economy, that plays into the favour of reactionary, regressive movements, who are going to become stronger as environmental destabilisation continues, which it will. And the second point is, in dealing with that environmental destabilisation, we're just not going to be able to do it unless we all play a role in that great collective effort. And to make sure that everyone has got a good role, we've got to make sure we have a more just as well as a more sustainable economy.
Thank you.
Thank you.